If you're a woman and you're listening today, I think you're kind of badass. Not just kinda. I know you are. And if you're someone who is listening today who has women in your life, tell them how much they mean to you. Today is International Women's Day, and this year's theme is Choose to Challenge. I'll be honest with you, I actually recorded this episode before I found out that that was the challenge for this year. But you know what? Change is so necessary in our world right now. It's hard to not even think that this would be the topic of discussion for this year's International Women's Day. So on today's episode, I wanted to come to you. So it's just me talking with you about 4 different cycles that we go through as women specifically. They could apply to other individuals in our lives as well, but they really are concentrated, and how they impact our life from a practical standpoint, a relationship standpoint, a financial standpoint, and emotionally and within our health. And then 5 key takeaways for you to be able to spark yourself into action today so that you can become more empowered financially. You deserve this. You are worthy of wealth beyond just your net worth, holistically in your life. Money touches every single aspect of our lives. So tune in today so that you can take a better grasp at what's happening in your financial picture and thrive forward. Wink, wink. Hello there, everyone. Today is just a solo episode with yours truly, so there will be nobody joining me. But I thought nonetheless, for us to be able to celebrate International Women's Day, then talking about money, because we're celebrating or bringing awareness to, is what I would say, the wage gap, because there still is immense gender gaps when it comes to equal pay. And that was seen even wider in 2020 when we saw a mass exodus of women from the workforce, especially in fall of 2020, when kids were going back to school and parents had to make the decision of who was going to stay home. A lot of times in the household, the person who was making less amount of money was the person that stayed home. So when we talk about gender gap, this massively put a lot of women back because they were staying at home now. Nothing against women staying at home. We all have our roles. We all have what's important to us. We all have our visions of how we want to live life. So it doesn't matter if you are a mom who works from home, if you are a mom who works in an office, if you are a mom who owns a business, if you are not a mom, or if you are a stepmom, or if you are a foster mom, or if you are an auntie and a grandma, whatever that might be, whatever female title you align yourself with, is the topic today is going to be relevant for you. So we're going to talk a little bit about finances when it comes to women. And I want to focus really on 4 different aspects that affect us a little bit differently than men. And it doesn't mean that men aren't affected by the same things. It just means statistically, we are impacted more. One piece, which I just got done talking about, is the aspect that women tend to be the caregivers for the majority of the people in their lives, whether it be children, parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents, other loved ones, or individuals in our lives. Women inherently are more so the caregiver, or the individual who is administering care. We are the ones who take a step back from our career. And I use back for those of you who are not watching the video version, but the podcast version, I use back loosely because there were times in my career where people could have said I took a step back when actually it was a power step forward, right? But I think that there are elements, and I have seen this throughout my career, where women have to step into that caregiver role, which means that they might have to create a balancing act of professional life and home life, or might have to make the sacrifice of leaving the workforce in order to care for someone else, whether it is a child, a parent, again, any type of loved one. Women have the tendency to be that person. I like to say the glue that keeps everything together. the one who's good at the balancing act. And I think that that's why we see the differences between men and women, especially when it comes to money, is then as we step into that caregiver role, that caregiver role can also encompass financial obligations and responsibilities for that person that we care for. But a lot of times it comes into that aspect of how are we managing the day-to-day living, the health and the wellness and the mindset and well-being of that individual. So it ends up being a lot more of the practical and social emotional side of things rather than the financial aspect of things. And I could go back and argue, as I did in our episode with Jamie, that, and she agreed that we're taught these things, right? As women growing up, there are different topics of money that are discussed with young boys versus young girls. When we talk about money with girls, we have the tendency to talk about it in an element of saving and inherently about spending in a consumer style. Because if we think about gender roles in a household, and again, I'm using air quotes, women have been responsible for the grocery shopping or the kids' activities or whatever it might be. Again, in our household, the Foreman household, we are of equal responsibility. So Jim Foreman gets to understand all of those things as well. Whereas traditionally, with young boys, we talk about investing and saving and growing and getting, income growth and those types of things. There are very differing conversations and can create different mindsets for us as we continue to build on in life. And if you listen to the episode with Matt Gardner, where we talked about the 4 money bears, we talked about some of those aspects that are built at a young age and those responsibilities of a parent to be able to have those conversations. And unfortunately, historically, those conversations have not happened with women. And so when we go into situations where we're put up against a wall or we have to choose between a rock and a hard place, we're usually going to choose the relationships that we have to take care of. And we're gonna spin in that cycle that we're really good at rather than focusing in an area where we maybe aren't feeling as confident. And that is where today I want to be able to drill down a little bit more into some of those spaces. As I talked about, the second point, the first point being like we end up in these caregiver roles. The second point is that caregiver role has transitioned us out of the workforce and at the level of millions leaving the workforce in September of 2020. And what does that mean? That means that we've had an element of now, households are making less income. Women are now at a space where maybe they're looking for that side hustle or a work environment that is going to allow them flexibility to be able to, for those that are still teaching at home and administering distance learning at home, to have that level of flexibility. And I think what we're starting to see, and I'll argue to say that some of the systems that have been created by men for men, not by women for all. And I think when we look at leadership, one of the pieces when I had a team that reported to me and even my current team, I look at them from the whole individual, right? What are their other responsibilities? We as individuals can't just stop and not allow things that happen to us that morning to not carry into the rest of our day. I don't care. You can take deep breaths. You can do all of those different things, which I do, and try not to carry all of those things in. But we are human. And if we don't have the right, habits and things in place for us to be able to separate those things, they really do affect us. And especially when we're all confined into one space. So when women are leaving the workforce, A, because they're making less money, and B, because they're feeling like they have to step into that caregiver role, what does that mean for their career? And that transcends into those financial conversations. Well, if you're busy making sure that your kids are educated and distance learning is happening and that there's a healthy meal on the table, and oh, by the way, that somebody has birthday gifts and birthday cards and all of these things that inherently sometimes fall into the space of women. What happens when we're trying to find that space for us and that space of financially thriving? Because not all of us are mothers either. There's a huge force of us that are, and I have this tendency to speak in that space because that is a role I'm very familiar with. And I'm familiar with that struggle of being a professional woman and working in corporate America and wanting so desperately to be a stellar mom for my kids. And I watched my mother work 3 jobs and care for those that are around her. We lived with my grandfather, and my mom lived with him until the end of his days. And I remember caring for him those last 2 weeks and how much she did the last years of his life, going to doctor's appointments, paying his bills, making sure the house was taken care of, all of these things. And then the woman transitioned into taking care of my dad, who now has Alzheimer's. I mean, these caregiving aspects are full-time jobs. And so when you're stepping into those spaces, whether it's your children or somebody else that you're caring for, it doesn't matter if you're a mom or a daughter or whoever it is, those responsibilities take up a lot of space and energy. And when we happen to go through those types of life transitions, whether it's leaving an employer or taking care of ourselves, how do we adjust? How do we create a level of flexibility and comfort and independence? Because I think that is a major topic that we want to focus on when it comes to finances as well. We don't want to make that something that somebody else does for us, rather that we are educated and empowered in those spaces and have the tools and resources to be in that space, right? So needless to say, right? Okay, so we're going in the direction of you as a woman have the tendency to step into a caregiver role. We have the wage gap, and sometimes we have to leave the workforce, which also sets us back financially, right? Because if you're not making income and you're responsible for all of these individuals in your life and caring for them, how are you growing your wealth? How are you growing your income? So then let's say, you're now dealing with all of these other aspects, because when you experience a life transition, it inherently affects you in 4 different ways: practically, financially, emotionally, and throughout your relationships. So we can see that those types of things happen to us as we go forward into our lives, right? So I would say women tend to want more flexibility because of the responsibilities that we carry with everything else in our lives. And the workplace, the way it is designed right now, or at least going into 2020, didn't always allow for that to happen. And even going into fall of 2020, didn't allow for it to happen. And I would argue that the system is created in a space that doesn't allow women that flexibility. And in turn, we think that we have to do everything, and then we burn out. And that's not healthy at all. And so what I want you to get out of this episode is, have you been in this space before? Is this something that you are experiencing? Let's talk about some of the things that we can establish and can control. So perhaps that you have now stepped away from your job, or you're still, balancing all of the plates in the air, trying to, be the mom and be the coworker, be the business owner, whatever it might be. How do you do all of the things? Well, we need to be able to communicate what our needs are and what our capacity is. And if we can't do that, then we're going to be in a really hurting space. The other part is, it's okay to reinvent yourself. I think that this is so important. And after 2020, I've seen lots of women do this. You don't have to work in a traditional space. We have the ability to negotiate. Our skills are so incredibly valuable in the workplace, at home, wherever we are. So no matter where you are, you have the ability to negotiate what you need. Having that conversation and empowering. I think that we can all argue that some of us became a whole hell of a lot more productive in 2020, balancing amounts of titles and responsibilities, that now maybe we can say, you know what, I'll get the same amount of work done for the same amount of pay in these amount of hours. Or, you know what? I'm not going to work 9 to 5. I might work 5 to 9, take a break, and then I might work from 12 to 3 and I might work here. We traditionally had this thought process. I remember in my career, I had a superior of mine who would come in to check and make sure everyone was in their office by 9 a.m. What does that do for your employees if you're coming in and checking in at 9 a.m. to make sure everyone is in? Mind you, some nights I actually was in events until 7, 10, even 11 o'clock at night. So for me to turn around and come in at 9 o'clock, what kind of life does that live for me? With no days off unless I was actually taking them. So instead of, saying like, I'm going to be in at 9 o'clock every day, I said, no, I'm going to articulate for you what my schedule looks like. And this is when I'm going to work and I'm still going to get the job done. And if I don't get the job done, then let's have a conversation. And I think that that's where we can be really empowered as women. We are very valuable individuals in society. Society is a much better space with us. And so that's where we've got to link arms and really take it upon ourselves. It doesn't matter if we're a stay-at-home mom or a working from home mom or a working from the office mom or a business owner mom or solopreneur mom, all of these different titles that we all have inherently the same things that are going on. We're caring for multiple individuals. We've probably had to make some sacrifices in life, and we're still battling the same systems that are set in place for us that don't necessarily set us up for success. So being able to change those systems isn't always easy. However, if we join together, we have the ability to do that. I think that comes into the aspect of communication, right? Communication and knowledge is very powerful. If we don't have the knowledge of what other individuals are doing or that I negotiated in this space, hey, Shannon, how did you have that conversation? What did you say you wanted for a salary or hourly pay when you were in that negotiation space? So that I knew that, I too can do something like that and can make the same amount of money and move forward. You see, sometimes when we're so busy doing the caregiving and the sacrificing that we have to do in order to administer that caregiving, we forget our power. And we have the power to be able to create change and move in a direction of forward. And so that's where I think we have the conversations with each other. When is the last time you sat down with a girlfriend and you talked about very specifically without any shame or regret or anything negatively associated? When did you talk about your net worth? When did you talk about your expenses? When did you talk about retirement savings? When did you talk about the debt that you have or the income that you make? You see, we don't talk about those things, but men do. And women have the tendency, and if you do talk about it, high five to you. Me too. I talk about these things quite frequently. And I think that it's important that we do so and have transparency with it, because that gives us the power to know, hey, you know what? I know that so-and-so is doing about the same thing I am, and they're making X, Y, Z, and their benefits package is this. Well, why can't I? Why don't I have the ability to negotiate that or ask for that, right? We have the ability to sit down and have those conversations with individuals and maybe push back a little bit or join forces together to be able to have a forceful conversation to create change within a company that you have. And I would also say this for entrepreneurs or business owners. This is an opportunity for you to see maybe what other individuals in your field are making so that you can do that as well. Rather than creating this as an obstacle, you create it as an ability for us to empower ourselves moving forward. So I encourage you to have those conversations. Again, you'll hear me say this a lot. Like we've created we've had to care for others, which has created sacrifices for us. But that doesn't mean that we can't communicate and start to trend forward. And we have to do this because we live longer. And that is going to affect us and bring the circle full back to who's going to care for us and how are they going to care for us and how is that going to impact their lives. I have these conversations a lot with my clients around, how do you want to impact the next generation or your kids or the people that come after you? And the reason why I have those conversations, it's usually after us talking about how was the impact of the generation before you? How did they talk to you about money? How did they talk to you about caring for them? What pieces did they have organized and in play for you or not organized? And it felt like a really big part-time or full-time job to administer those things. How do you want to do those things differently? You see, it's important for us to be able to talk about those things so that we don't end up in this full circle again, right? Where we're caring for each other, we're sacrificing, we're not communicating. So therefore we don't have the tools to be successful and create wealth, right? If we open those doors for communication, we have the ability to be able to open more doors for ourselves and change what I say is the generational trauma that passes on and passes on and passes on. And maybe it's even the societal aspects that pass on and pass on and pass on. So I want to talk a little bit about 5 things that you can focus your efforts on when it comes to really changing this element of communication and empowerment moving forward. Specifically, this can be for anyone in all honesty, but it does impact women much more. 1, I need you to understand your value. I want you to hear me when I say this. You are valuable and you are worth it. And I can't tell you how many times I hadn't felt that in my life until I started saying it to myself. And even sometimes, look, I'm not a perfect person. Sometimes I still feel in a rut, and there are days where I don't necessarily always feel that way, but I try to. And it's the element of teaching myself the behavior to know that I am and that I have the power to move forward. Why I say that is the piece that's so important. And Jamie and I talk about this based on the business part of things in the episode that her and I will launch, or if you've listened to it already. We talk about understanding your values and your vision, specifically when it comes to your business, but I think this is always important for your life. Because you can do X, Y, Z. You can care for this individual. You can make this amount of money. You can save this amount of money. You can retire this way or that way. But what are you feeling? What are you valuing? Who are you spending that time with? What does it feel like? What does it smell like? What is that experience? How are you living it? If you don't have that value, that vision, and that mission for your life, then none of that other stuff matters. And if you can't strongly stand in that space, then again, none of that will matter. And some of the other tips that I'm going to tell you about aren't going to matter either. So you've got to get really clear and concise on what do you want that vision to look like. And that doesn't mean that doesn't flex and change. That's the beauty of, working in a partnership around financial planning is it flexes and changes with you. So again, your vision and mission can change, your financial plan can change, your relationships can change, your health and wellness can change as well. So do you have a vision that can flex and change with that as well? So be very clear on what your mission and your vision is for your life and understand that you are worth it. Tip number 2 that I would say is, understand what you have right now. And if you're in partnership with someone else, this is not somebody else's task for you. This is not somebody else's ownership, because what happens if that person is no longer with you, right? Whether that is a divorce, a death, anything like that. How are you educating yourself right now so that in the future you understand what implications and impacts your finances provide? Because again, any life transition that you're going to go through is going to impact you from a practical standpoint, from a financial standpoint, from a relationship standpoint, and from a social, emotional health standpoint, right? So those are 4 very key categories. And if we don't understand what we have right now, what is our philosophy? What do we own? What do we owe? What are the liabilities that we have? How do those two work together? Is there a positive number or a negative number? And if so, then what are we doing from an income standpoint? So I call it cash flow rather than budget, because people think budgeting is gross, and that's not a word that you like to always talk about. So it's cash flow. Your cash flow inherently impacts your net worth. So think of it this way: whatever you make and whatever you spend, whatever goes in and whatever comes out, is going to either build that net worth or it's going to subtract it and make it negative, right? Because if we have liabilities that are beyond what we can support from a cash flow perspective, we're not ever going to be able to live in a space of comfort. And most individuals, and especially women that I talk to, want comfort and security in understanding their financial situation. And being able to do that is empowering yourself to understand things, sitting down and having a conversation with your partner, or sitting down and having a conversation with yourself and getting organized and understanding where everything is at, separate from shame and regret and things like that. If you look today where you are, you have the ability to make change in the future. If you continue to ignore it, you will not be able to empower yourself forward, and you will just continue down the same path that you are going, whether positive or negative, or serving or not serving, right? We have to remember that wherever we are today is not where we have to keep going. We have a choice to be able to change that. So understanding that. And if you are looking for something to help you get aligned in that space, we have a free wealth assessment tool that's located on our website, forethoughtplanning.com. You can register there to get it. It's a simple download and PDF that's fillable. That being said, I want you to think about the importance of what if something happened to you. No one wants to think about this. I'll be honest with you. No one wants to think about death, dying, getting sick, any of those things. But you are so valuable to those lives that are around you. What if something happened to you? What if you got sick? What if you did lose your job? What if you passed away? Who would care for the people that are around you? Who would know things? If you are a single individual, how are you passing that along? Who's going to care for you? What communication tools do you have available? If you're a parent, what legal documents do you have in place to be able to take care of your children? How will this impact your family? Do you understand how they'll be cared for? I mean, we oftentimes don't think about what would happen to us because we're so busy caring for someone else. It's important that we understand that. And again, we don't create this cycle, right? Educating ourselves around those pieces. So something that you can do in that space is understand the legal documents that you should have in order. Do you have a will? Do you have a healthcare directive? Do you have a power of attorney? Do you have somebody that knows, and have you communicated with those individuals on what it is? Do you have a team in place, a financial team in place, a mental health team in place? Who's helping to make sure that you are healthy from a mindset perspective, from a financial perspective, and from a physical wellness perspective, right? Those people are all important. From a financial standpoint, are those individuals communicating with each other? So is your financial advisor communicating? If you are running the show and you are the one that is producing and investing and doing it yourself, who knows where those things are if something were to happen to you? It's very key that we have these types of things in place, because if something happens to us, we don't want shit to hit the fan, right? We want to make sure that we have things in place. As the caregiver, as the individual that's there, what happened if something happened to us? We don't want to think about that, but what do you have in play? The fourth piece is, if this is not your jam, friend, like if you do not find a lot of empowerment around managing your finances, hire somebody, right? If you were going to run a marathon, would you train yourself, and you never had before, right? Would you train yourself Or would you seek resources in order to be able to do it the right way so that, I don't know, you don't pull a hammy or a quad or whatever it might be? I know I would have to, because I wouldn't know the first thing about running a marathon. And for those of you that have ran a marathon, woohoo, kudos to you. But not everybody has done that, right? Not everybody has the drive to manage everything from a financial standpoint. And I will say this, we live in a society that really encourages us to really have everything figured out and do everything ourselves and do it for the cheapest possible. Guess what? You don't have to do that. Of course, we want you to save money and not have a high fee structure, which is why it's important to understand what you should be looking for when you hire somebody. Are they working for your best interest? Are they fiduciary? Are they doing financial planning? Are they making sure that they're, are you understanding if they're, have a compliance team, that they work with registered individuals like a broker dealer, so there's security behind your investment strategy? Are they partnering with other investment resources and they're not like counting beans in their basement, right? How are these individuals educated is very important. You don't have to do it yourself, though. There are plenty of individuals out there that will be able to help you and walk you through these things and be your partner. So don't listen to everybody else. If this isn't your jam, you don't have to do it. Lastly, and I would argue that this is probably the most important piece to anything, it's making sure that you're communicating what you need to learn, where you feel uncomfortable with your partner, with anyone else that's trusted in your life, but especially if you hire somebody with that advisor, make sure that you're communicating, because we don't always know what's changing in your life or what life transitions you're going through. And we might have even more resources to be that stable individual helping you through these life transitions to get you to the next space that you want to go to. But it all relates back to that first point of understanding who you are, what your worth is, and what is important to you. If you don't have a really strong grounding in that, we can be as strategic as we want to. We can save as much money as we want to, but what for? At the end of the day, what for? And if we don't want to continue this vicious cycle of caregiving, sacrifice, not communicating, harboring, pieces of us that we're ashamed to admit we might not know about. Communication is that key to making sure that we don't continue this cycle. We are going to have responsibilities of caregiving, but if we communicate with our loved ones around what we can do, whether it's our siblings, whether it's our parents, being able to have these conversations are very key. And I get asked a lot, these are great pieces, Shannon, but how do I have these conversations? So I'm going to give you just a few starters based on different relationships that I see happening pretty frequently. One is with ourselves, right? And we've talked about that a little bit already, but self, where am I? Where do I want to be? Realistically, what do I know? And do I have the tools and resources to get to the places that I need to or want to? And can I build on that? So that's a conversation with yourself. And that's something that you can easily put pen to paper and think about. Now, let's enter into that conversation with a partner. And money can provide lots of elements of difference in relationship. One might have more control over things. You both might not have a good take on everything, right? Like there are situations where you might not have enough, you might have too much, and you still don't understand how everything works, right? So being able to sit down and say, what were your experiences growing up with money? How did you interpret what wealth meant? How did you interpret what a budget was? How did you interpret how to live off of your salary or your income that you make? What are the things that you were taught about money? because you see, you and your partner are coming from very different spaces when it comes to money, because we all have different ways that we grow up. And even if we grow up exactly in the same household, we still have different behaviors when it comes to money. So having that base of knowledge and understanding where that other person is coming from eliminates some of the aspect of, oh, this person is just going to snap on me, or we're just going to fight about it, or he's never going to see my side of things, or she's never this or that, right? The tit for tat. That's not going to be productive. But if you can set a good playing field in communication with your partner, that might help you. From there, after you have that conversation around like, what are those experiences, asking, where do we want to go as individuals together, right? What do we want our life to look like? And are we doing the right things right now to get to that space? Do we need additional tools and resources to fill in the spaces that we might not feel that confident about? So that's with your partner. The other two key conversations are going to be with loved ones, whether it's your parents or individuals that you might be responsible with. And the last one will be with your children. So, a lot of times, like I mentioned, we're going to be caregivers, and that's going to mean that we're going to have potentially health and financial responsibilities for those individuals. And this can get very difficult depending on what generation you're dealing with and the level of privacy that those individuals had. And I think starting out with a simple phrase of, you know what, mom, dad, aunt, uncle, my obligation I take very seriously in caring for you from a financial or health part, insert whatever aspect you're helping them with, right? I want to make sure that I really execute on your wishes and what's important to me, to you. So could you help me understand more of what that looks like and how you would like me to take action around these pieces? Make that onus go back on them. Show that value that you really take what you're doing seriously, and you want to make sure that it's about them. A lot of times what I hear and feel from older generations, or as I like to usually phrase them as experienced generations, is this level of security. And again, sometimes just not wanting people to know because we don't want people to judge us or shame us for the spaces that we might be in. And we also know that our experienced population, our older individuals in our population are vulnerable and can be taken advantage of. And it is very important that we distinguish ourselves from that space when caring for somebody else. So asking them before it gets too late to have those conversations. It could be as simple as, you know what, mom, dad, aunt, uncle, I was listening to this podcast and they were talking about how to have conversations with the people that we love. And I think that I'd love to be able to understand a little bit more about what you're doing so that I am here and able to help in any way that I might need to in the future. What do you have set up to make sure that you're okay and that we execute on your wishes? Right? Those are proactive conversations to be able to have. Don't wait till somebody is laying in a hospital bed or a hospital bed at home. And we've experienced this a lot with COVID-19. So don't be afraid to have some of these conversations with the people that you love. Second, or lastly, I want to talk about how to have these conversations with your children. One, with adult children, and two, with minor children, right? Setting those expectations, and they look very differently. But if you are a parent and you are having the conversation with your child, potentially you're putting them as power of attorney or healthcare directive, right? Or they're the administrator of your estate or a trustee for you. These are all very important roles in executing your wishes. And so being very clear about what those are is very important. Again, going back to those visions of what you want your life to look like. That's your life here and your life when maybe you're not as in control, or you're not here any longer. Of course, we don't love hearing or talking about those things, but if we don't communicate and have those conversations, things might not actually flow the way we want to, right? Excuse me. Setting the expectation that that you know, if there are siblings involved, right? I don't want you and your siblings to argue, or having a family meeting and say, you know what, these are the things that we set up and why. You know, we appointed so-and-so in this space. This is why we feel that way. We appointed this person in this space, and this is why we feel that way. This is what we would like you to, or you individuals, or you single person, to be able to execute on for us. This is when we want you to be able to step into this space. This is, if something like this happened, this is what I would want to happen. These are all very emotionally charged conversations. So being patient and being able on both sides, whether you're receiving the information or giving the information, having patience and grace with the individuals is really important. The last piece I want to talk about is having conversations with your minor children. Now, you don't necessarily have to have conversations about, hey, what if something happened to you? Because that might be hard for some kids to hear. However, you know, if you're in a situation where your health is compromised, having those types of conversations and letting them know what you love about them and the time that you've spent with them and what your wishes are for them in the future is a great way for them to understand just how much you love them. However, I think one important conversation to have as a parent is teaching our kids the value of communication and education around money. And these are topics that you can get your kids involved with. As simple as the grocery store and taking them to the grocery store, giving them the list and setting a limit of what the expenses are for that grocery trip, right? Getting them involved of what that looks like so that they take ownership in that space. So they educate themselves and have a greater understanding of what's happening from a financial standpoint. I say this too for individuals that are very blessed financially. Teaching your kids good behaviors when it comes to money, and not that mom and dad will just write a check for things. I often find that we always want our kids to have a better life than us, no matter where we're at from an income or a net worth standpoint. We all want our kids to have a better situation than where we were. I grew up not having very much money, and my kids, frankly, are spoiled as all get out. And I'm the mom that's like, oh, if you only knew how hard it was when I was growing up. I kid, but I'm also serious in the aspect of educating my kids around what it takes to have money and finances and wealth build and grow. I often say money is to be spent and wealth is to stay. So having the conversations around what that looks like and what those values are, that it's okay to reward yourself in different times and spend money, but it's also really rewarding to do the same when it comes to saving and investing. So I think those are conversations to be able to have with our kids. You can listen to the episode with Mac Gardner, where we talk about the 4 money bears. There's some great resources. He has an entire book that you can utilize in that conversation with your children. That being said, in wrap up, I want you to remember that this cycle of sacrificing because we have to care for others in our lives doesn't mean that we have to rely on the systems that are already in place for us. Rather, we have the power to empower ourselves going forward using a simple tool of communication to get ourselves there, and understanding, one, what our values are and our vision is for life, and making sure that we move forward on that. 2, understanding where we are and what we have, what we own, what we owe, what goes in and what comes out. What do we have for cash flow? And are the numbers positive? And if so, what are the strategies behind that? Number 3, what if something happens to us? What are the systems? What are the legal documents that we have in play, and who knows about them? 4th, if this is not your jam, friend, then it is okay to hire somebody else. And 5th, like I've said throughout this entire conversation, and the most important part, is to be able to communicate and have some of those difficult conversations so that we understand and are really clear about our expectations, which brings us back to our vision so that we aren't in this space of a constant circle that feels some like maybe a hamster wheel that we're never getting off. Let's use our power to empower ourselves forward. As I always say, you are worthy of wealth. Thank you for listening today.